Welcome to our fourth webinar for this fall's Texas Academy Marine Policy Series. I am Alyssa Schultz, the Graduate Director and host. The aim of this webinar series is, again, to build off of the foundation laid from last year's series, where we learned a lot about the local and federal government structure and processes, the role of science in policy, as well as for policy and how to communicate science in the policy sphere. If you've missed any of our previous talks or want to check out our webinar series from last fall, you can find those on the Texas Sea Grant YouTube channel, which is also embedded on the TAMP webpage. This year's webinar series revolves around ocean governance, policy, and regulatory bodies. Today we have a great speaker, Carrie Schmaus, who will talk to us about the role of federal agencies supporting marine energy and the Department of Energy collaboration with other federal agencies and communities. If you have any questions or thoughts during the talk, please feel free to put them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We'll have some time following the presentation to engage with our speaker. So with that, let's meet today's speaker. Carrie Schmaus, she, her, is a Marine Energy Technology Manager at the Water Power Technologies Office at the U.S. Department of Energy and a 2018 Young Professional Leader at the International Electrotechnical Commission. Before spending 2.5 years with the Water Power Technologies Office as a NOAA Knauss Marine Science and Policy Fellow and ORISE Fellow from 2018 to 2020, she worked as a research fellow at the National Council for Public-Private Partnerships, a DC-based nonprofit that supports successful public-private partnership models. Her master's is from the School of Marine and Environmental Affairs at the University of Washington, and she graduated Phi Beta Kappa from Wittenberg University with a degree in biology. So with that, Carrie, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Alyssa, and hi, everybody. Really a pleasure to be here with you today. Let me just get my screen shared, and looks like everybody can see that. So yeah, as Alyssa mentioned, I'm Carrie Schmaus. I'm a technology manager at the Water Power Technologies Office, where I started now about 6 years ago as a Sea Grant Knauss Fellow. So I'm very familiar with the Sea Grant program, really a wonderful program. And I was placed in the office and stayed there ever since. So today I'm really excited to tell you about some of our work in marine energy. I've tried to highlight a couple projects that I think will be of interest for the group. And I really encourage questions. I made the presentation relatively short, so we would have time for discussion at the end. So with that, I'll just kick us off with what is a marine energy program. So the Water Power Technologies Office is, of course, in the Department of Energy. We're a part of the department that's called Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, EERE. So if you hear that acronym, that's what that is. But the Water Power Technologies Office is split up into two main bodies. The first is conventional hydropower, which I don't really work on. So if you have questions on that, I can direct you to the appropriate folks. But then the other half of our office is focused on marine energy. And the marine energy program mission is pretty simple. It's harness energy from the world's oceans, and resources that we're interested in and that we fund projects in are listed there on the bottom left. They're ocean waves, tides, currents, both ocean and river, as well as thermal, salinity, and pressure gradients. And here are some photos of some of our recent deployments. We have up on the top one from Onika, which was in Nags Head, North Carolina. That is a wave power desalination device. CalWave was deployed in San Diego, California, pictured there as well. That's a wave energy device. And then one of our national labs, NREL, developed a device called HeroWEC, which was also deployed in Nags Head, North Carolina. And then on the bottom is a tidal turbine energy device developed by Vernant Power that was actually deployed in the East River in New York. So just a couple photos there to kind of put a face to the name of marine energy. But for those that may not be super familiar with marine energy or the resource that the United States has, I just wanted to share this little map. The big takeaway is that if we were able to harness all of the marine energy across the United States, it would be equivalent to about 57% of electricity generated in 2019. So it's really a pretty substantial amount of renewable energy that is out there available to be harnessed. So we, of course, in the US are quite excited about that. And then if you look globally, the numbers are different, but lots of marine energy anywhere that has an ocean, which of course is most of the world. But you may be thinking to yourself, why isn't marine energy outside my door? Well, it's a nascent technology. It's still quite early stage, and that is due in large part to some of the main challenges of marine energy. So I just wanted to take a few minutes to highlight what those are. The first one is perhaps a bit obvious. Marine energy technologies are expensive. The goal of our office is to do the research and development and testing that can help drive those costs down and improve the performance of the devices. But it's also worth noting that government funds can only take projects so far, and that at some point the private sector, NGOs or others will need to put in some funds and work on this project to really get the technology off the ground. But the next one is something that is just forever going to be true. The ocean is just not an easy place to operate machinery. It's corrosive, it's a harsh environment, it's quite energetic in some places. And so one of the big challenges that marine energy has is still to understand what types of materials and device designs can best survive in that rough ocean environment. The third challenge is that there are not a ton of facilities where marine energy researchers can test their devices. I'll touch on this in just a moment, but that's something that the Water Power Technologies Office is really working hard on improving. So I'll tell you more about that in a moment, but to date, there haven't been many facilities where testing is available. And then finally, there is significant licensing or regulatory barriers. Oh, I apologize if you can hear my dog in the background. I'm really sorry about that. And so marine energy developers really have to go through significant licensing to test their machines in the ocean. And this can be quite a lengthy process that can cost a lot of money as well. Just one moment, please. Sorry about that. Okay, so here is a slide that provides a good overview of the Water Power Technologies Office research and development approaches. And so, like I mentioned, we have these challenges in marine energy, but we've kind of broken our program up into these 4 specific buckets to help address some of those. And so the first one is foundational and cross-cutting R&D. These are asking the really foundational questions, like what kind of materials best survive in an ocean environment? What kind of modeling tools do you need to understand how a device will work? Kind of questions like that. And then we have technology-specific design and validation. That's where a lot of our deployments take place. So you can see, again, a picture of that tidal turbine that I had on the first slide, as well as some other device designs there. So there's a flap, which is that one there on the bottom right, and then a riverine current device, which actually turns as the river flows. So you can see that there in the middle. And then we have a whole body of work focused on data sharing and analysis. And so these are projects that ensure the data that's produced through our projects can be easily accessed and are accessible. I'll highlight one really fantastic report. It's called the State of the Science Report, and I can put a link to this later, but this is a report that goes through all the potential environmental effects of marine energy. This report is kind of near and dear to me because it was really the first document I read when I joined the office, because I really wanted to understand what it meant to put a device in the ocean, which of course could have some environmental effects. So I was excited to hear that the Water Power Office is funding a whole portfolio of work to understand what those effects are and then of course mitigate them. And then finally is a portfolio called Reducing Barriers to Testing, which I alluded to a little bit earlier. Because testing these devices is so important, but the regulatory challenges can be pretty onerous. We're excited that we are bringing more and more testing centers online every year. One to highlight for you is called PacWave. This is being developed off the coast of Oregon, and it will be the United States' first grid-scale, grid-connected wave energy test site. So we're really excited to see that come online in the next couple of years, and it's going to be a huge benefit to the marine energy industry. So now I wanted to move into a couple examples of how WPTO advances marine energy and really what does that mean? And so as I noted, we are a funding agency. We fund a variety of different projects. And so I tried to pull out a few that I thought would be interesting to this group. The first one that I have listed here is a national lab project. So DOE works with our network of national labs. The 3 that work most closely with the marine energy program are Pacific Northwest National Lab, that's up in Washington State, National Renewable Energy Lab, which is in Golden, Colorado, and Sandia National Labs, which is in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And this is a project out of PNNL. It's called the Autonomous Surface Vehicle, or ASV. And this is a really cool device. It's a test bed for remote docking and marine energy powered recharging. It can also be used as a test bed for automated environmental monitoring. And they're also doing a lot of autonomy and edge computing research with this device. So it's a pretty versatile device that can be used for a host of different end uses. But we're really interested in how this device can both help us understand the environment that marine energy might be deployed in, as well as be recharged by marine energy. And so a future phase of this project is going to look at using a tidal turbine to recharge the ASV. So there's a link there, and if I haven't already, I'll share these slides so everybody has access to them, so you can read more about that online. The next project I wanted to highlight is called the ORPC RivGen, that's Ocean Renewable Power Company. This is a really cool project. It was deployed in the Alaskan village of Igiugig. It's a project that started in 2015 and is still ongoing. And I think one of the kind of neatest aspects about this project is that community members have been involved really every step of the way. And actually one of the PIs on this project is from Alaska. And so the community was quite involved in kind of the development and the deployment of the project. And the overall goal of it is to reduce the reliance on diesel, as well as developing local capacity for future operations and maintenance of the device. So there's a really great document that I've linked there that can tell you more about the ORPC project, but that is a great example of a project that really worked hand in hand with the community to make sure that the marine energy device is meeting their needs and that they really have stake in the project as well. The final project I wanted to highlight for you is one that you may actually be familiar with because it is a project that's being run by Texas A&M Experiment Station. It's called the Ocean Energy Safety Institute, or OESI. And this is a consortium of industry, national labs, NGOs, and academia. And the goal is to develop technology and workforce needed for increased energy production that is safer, more sustainable, and more cost effective. So no small feat there. But they have three main pillars of different energies that they're interested in. Oil and gas, of course, is one, offshore wind, and then marine energy. And so this project has been really fascinating because it's really bringing together these three offshore energy industries. And we're looking through this project how cross-cutting priorities can kind of be established across those three, even though they are so different. There are lessons learned, of course, when you put anything out at sea. And so that's a pretty interesting project as well, and one that would be near and dear to this group. So there's a link there that you can learn more about that project as well. Okay, and so being familiar with Sea Grant, took kind of some assumptions and tried to understand and figure out what would be most interesting to you all. So I put a slide together on interagency collaboration, but like I said, if I don't cover something that you're interested in, we should have ample time for questions, and I'm really happy to talk about anything. But in terms of interagency collaboration, the first question that you might have is who in the federal government is working on ocean equities? And the answer is actually much bigger than I realized when I first got to the federal government. And so we have kind of the obvious ones. We have Sea Grant and NOAA, BOEM, EPA, BSEE, the Marine Mammal Commission, if you're familiar with them. But there's also quite a bit of work happening at DoD, so the Coast Guard, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, DARPA, which is also part of DoD, and ONR, also part of DoD, that's the Office of Naval Research. And then NSF, there's offices in the President, NASA. So all that to say is that there are a ton of offices across the federal government working on ocean equities. And one of our priorities is to work with them. And there are a few reasons to do that. The first one is to reduce duplication of work, of course. And in doing so, there's kind of this other goal of leveraging federal dollars effectively. So making sure that we are using the taxpayer dollars as effectively and efficiently as possible. And a lot of that happens when we work with other agencies with common goals. We also want to ensure mission areas are aligning to meet administration goals. So there are lots of reasons to work with our interagency partners, and it's a space we're quite involved in. There are a few ways we do this. The first one would be interagency bodies. And so the highest level, White House level ocean coordination entity is called the Ocean Policy Committee. And then, so we we do sit on that committee. There are also executive orders that come out of the White House that direct agencies to align their work with various administration goals. Typically, anything coming out of the White House is going to direct multiple agencies to work together to meet a common goal. So that's another method that we see interagency collaboration really coming into play. I'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but there was it's recent-ish now at this point. It came out within the last 6 months. It's called the Ocean Climate Action Plan. This is a really fantastic document that outlines a lot. There's a lot in there, but a bunch of different ideas on how we can work together as a federal government to implement some topics that have to do with ocean climate. So I'll talk more about that in a second. And then we also have individual projects between agencies. And so those are more kind of grassroots or ground up partnerships that ultimately get implemented through what's called an interagency agreement, or IAA. And so the takeaway here is that there's a bunch of different ways to work with other agencies, coming all the way from the very top at the White House to I know somebody at NOAA and I give them a call and say, hey, I really think we should work on this together. And then through time, we're able to work on a project together. And so I do have examples sort of that run the gamut of projects across those different levels of collaboration. So again, the OCAP, or Ocean Climate Action Plan. This is a whole of government approach to climate change mitigation related to the ocean. And like I said, it's a big document. It's online. If you just Google or search Ocean Climate Action Plan, it should come right up. And it's a pretty interesting read. I actually do recommend it. But the priorities that are listed in this document that align with stuff that we work on at the Water Power Technologies Office are, unsurprisingly, renewable energy, but also marine carbon dioxide removal, which is really this emerging interest that we've been quite interested in, as well as resilient coastal communities. And so those are the areas that we're sort of most involved with the Ocean Climate Action Plan, but there are other, that's not an inclusive list. So again, I do encourage you to take a look if you're interested in that. The second interagency project to mention is a collaboration with the private sector. So there's a company called Ebb Carbon. They are doing a demonstration at Pacific Northwest National Lab's SQUIM laboratory. So that is the marine energy laboratory that PNNL has. And you can see a photo of it there in the middle. This is a device that's designed to pull out 100 tons of carbon per year when it's running at full capacity. Right now, it's just in a pilot kind of demonstration phase, so it's not running at full capacity right now, but that is the eventual goal of the device. And this is a partnership between PNNL, NOAA's Pacific Marine Energy Lab, so that's PMEL, Ebb Carbon, and the University of Washington. So this is a really cool example of a project that has multiple agencies, national labs, and academia, and the private sector involved. So lots of folks coming together to make this happen. But it's a really neat project, and that's another one that you could learn about if you just put it into your search bar. The final one is called the Ocean Observing Prize, and this is a little bit more like kind of agency to agency. When I said I picked up the phone and called my friend at NOAA, that's really kind of how this started. So the Ocean Observing Prize is a prize that we ran in partnership with the IUS, which is Integrated Ocean Observing System office at NOAA. I happen to know another Knauss fellow that was working in that office, and we were able to make the connection. And the goal of this prize was to develop wave-powered rechargeable AUVs for hurricane monitoring, which was a use case that we came up with in partnership, of course, with NOAA. And they helped us scope it out. They helped us review. And it was really a pretty interesting design, build, test kind of prize. So happy to answer more questions about that as well. But for now, I just wanted to highlight a couple other projects that may be of interest that have to do with community resilience. And then this is my last slide so that we can stop and have some questions. But as I mentioned, we do have an interest in community resilience. We call it coastal community resilience. And two of the main topics that we really are focused on these days include microgrids and disaster recovery in the specific flavor of wave-powered desalination. And so this portfolio largely started with a prize called Waves to Water. So it was set up pretty similar to the Ocean Observing Prize. Had it started with a concept and then ended with an in-water test. And that was actually a couple of years ago. We recently funded a $9 million funding opportunity announcement or solicitation in desalination projects. And so that is using wave energy to desalinate ocean water that could then be used for drinking water. And we're thinking of it mostly in a disaster recovery scenario. If, for example, the water treatment plant was offline or there was no energy to power the community, then at least you could use wave energy to create drinkable water or potable water. But of course, if we think about different communities across the world that don't have access to clean drinking water, this is something that would be relevant to many people outside of a disaster scenario. So there's a link there. And again, you'll have these slides, so you'll be able to check out more information on that if you'd like. And then the last project to highlight for you all today is called the Energy Transitions Initiative Partnership Project, or ETIP. This is a technical assistance project that is specifically for remote or island communities, and even more specifically, those remote and island communities that are looking to transition to renewable energy. And so these kinds of communities, which you can see some examples there, we've got Alaska, Hawaii, Maine, and North Carolina. These are communities that have self-identified that they're interested in transitioning to renewable energy, and they can apply into this program and work with NREL and the other ETIP partners to have an energy analysis done, which includes generation, reliability, consumption, cost effectiveness. And like I mentioned, this is a really interesting program because it allows the communities to self-identify. And so there's kind of a theme here. A lot of our work is, or all of our work, I should say, that has to do with any kind of community really comes from a kind of a community-centric approach. So asking the community what they actually want. Nobody wants the federal government marching in with a solution that no one asked for, so we really try to avoid that and really let the community kind of drive the work that we do in marine energy. So with that, I will say thank you again for having me. Again, more than happy to take any questions. And then my email address is there should folks have questions after this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. That was such a great talk. We already have quite a few questions. So I will just go off with the first one. What are the potential ecological concerns with some of these marine energy projects, and how are these being mitigated? And secondary to that, how do these issues scale? E.g., what would be the ecological drawbacks of harnessing all of the US's marine energy versus keeping marine energy as a smaller part of the US's energy portfolio?
Thank you. Yeah, so that's a fabulous question, and one that I really had when I joined the office. And so, because I sort of personally wrestled with if I care about the ocean and want to mitigate climate change, which are the two things that drove me to working in this industry, am I comfortable with working in an office that eventually deploys devices into the ocean? And so the best and most complete answer to your question is going to be, again, in that State of the Science report, which actually was recently republished in 2020. So I'll definitely drop a link to that in the chat. But the short answer is yes. If you read that report, ultimately, climate change is much worse for the ocean than deploying marine energy. And so that's always kind of at the back of my mind, is that we really need to have a clean energy transition, mitigate climate change, and ultimately that is going to be what's best for the health of the ocean. So that's kind of an overall answer. A more specific answer is, what kind of potential environmental impacts are there? They're similar to any time you put anything in the ocean. So a wave energy converter, for example, has to be moored to the surface of the seafloor. So that can introduce potential risks of entanglement, environmental disruption if you have to drill something into the seafloor. It could change the wave dynamics. If you're taking energy out of the waves, then what does that mean kind of for the rest of the energy flow of the ocean? So there are a host of different questions that come up when you deploy something in the ocean. But like I said, I'm really proud to be part of this industry because it's really taken a thoughtful and holistic approach to what happens when you put something into the ocean, and then making sure that those potential effects are mitigated as much as possible. So this report, not to send you a whole report, but is really going to answer that question most let's see, it looks like I can only message hosts and panelists. So Alyssa, I'm sure you can share that with folks, but that's the link to that report. And it goes through a bunch of different potential environmental effects, including collision, like I mentioned, or entanglement. Electromagnetic fields is another question. If you have transmission lines on the bottom of the ocean, what kind of EMF are they generating, and what does that mean for species that will be affected by that? And there is a body of work. Of course, we wouldn't be the first people to put a line into the ocean. So we do try to leverage research done by oil, gas, offshore wind, or telecommunications in that case. But it's a pretty holistic report. So that's where you can find the kind of the specific answers to that question. But overall, the findings are that renewable energy and a clean way to generate energy to mitigate climate change is ultimately going to be the best for the health of the ocean. So that's where I landed on that question. And there was a second part. Do you mind reminding me what that was?
Sure. How do these issues scale? E.g., what would be the ecological drawbacks of harnessing all of the U.S. marine energy versus keeping marine energy as a smaller part of the U.S.'s energy portfolio?
Yes. Okay. So that is also a somewhat an unknown at this point because it's, again, a nascent industry. It hasn't been deployed at scale at this point. So I don't have a perfect answer for that, but I will tell you kind of the philosophy with which we approach deploying marine energy. My answer always, if we're thinking about a project, is could another renewable energy do this better? So could solar do it better? Could wind do it better? If so, it's not a good option. And so that 57%, if we could harness all the renewable energy in the United States, I doubt we would ever get maybe even close to that number. It's really going to come down to individually locations, kind of what that location needs. So there will be some locations, I'm thinking of the Alaskan village, Igiugig, that really could benefit from a super high percentage of marine energy being deployed in their community. So maybe for them, their energy mix is 90% marine energy. But if we think about a place like Washington State that has a ton of hydropower, they probably don't need that much marine energy to be added to their energy mix to keep the carbon emissions down. And so it's not going to be a one size fits all kind of approach. I think ultimately, as the United States and the world transitions to a lower carbon or carbon free electrical grid, it's really going to be a patchwork of what kind of solutions work for that place. So the question of how the effects scale will be very relevant for those places like in Igiugig that would need to ask, well, okay, if we put turbines in every river, what does that mean for our salmon runs? And that would certainly be a question that would be asked very early on for a place like that. But in general, I don't think, we probably won't see 57% of our energy mix coming from marine energy really at any point, because we have other renewable energies that can help us make up that energy mix. So that was a little bit of a walk around to answering that question, but hopefully kind of helps get to the point of it, which is like, will we actually be harnessing all that energy, which I think the answer is probably not. Great.
We have another two-parter, so I'll just give you the first part and then we'll come back and go to the second part.
Perfect.
How are climate change impacts, including sea level rise and more intense and possibly frequent coastal storms and hurricanes, being considered for the future of marine energy?
Yes, so there's kind of a two-part answer I have for that. The first is because these storms are becoming more frequent and climate change is exacerbating all these the storms and frequency and intensity of them. To me, that makes marine energy development even more urgent because as climate change progresses, that is only going to get worse. So it's kind of a half of that question. The other half is we and all offshore industries rely on a lot of modeling to understand what the environment looks like today and what it's going to look like for 20 years and 50 years and 100 years from now. Of course, those are always going to be best guesses, but before deploying anything, we have a really good idea of what that environment looks like, and then also incorporating how it's likely to change over the lifetime of the project. Right now, I will be transparent and say that is not sort of our number one question because we're still working on the very foundational mechanics of how marine energy works. But in the future, when we are putting out a device that we think is going to be there for 20 or 50 years, certainly that question is going to become ever more important. And so I think integrating the outputs of those models into the device design and making sure that if it's likely to see 100-year storm, or which we should all be incorporating, I think, into our designs. Those kinds of pieces of information need to be incorporated from the start to make sure that the design of the device is such that it could survive storms, especially as we know they get more frequent and worse.
Right. And you sort of addressed the second part, but it was, how does the increased risk impact the potential future utility of marine energy?
Yeah, so I think I'll just kind of say a couple thoughts and hopefully they'll sort of meld together. The first is that marine energy, I think, is going to be deployed sort of at a location by location basis. So it will make it'll make a lot of sense for some places and not make much sense for others. And that's okay. We just need to deploy where it makes sense. And so for those places that it is a reasonable energy source, then we'll have to kind of take that into account if we, okay, what does a 100-year storm, what does a 200-year storm look like? How do we make sure the device can withstand that? And so I think all of it is just kind of thinking ahead and thinking holistically and just making sure that we're not putting something out there that's ultimately going to fail. And to do that, we have to design well and test a lot. And so just for kind of food for thought, one way that we've discussed making sort of storm safe devices would be maybe during normal conditions, it's floating on the surface and working. But if a storm is approaching, perhaps the device could actually go underwater and avoid, the biggest impacts of the storm. And that way it could kind of retreat into like a storm safe mode. So maybe it's not working, but it's kind of waiting out the storm. And that way, when the storm settles, it can come back up and continue generating electricity without failing. So that's just kind of one way that question's being talked about right now.
Great. Okay. Now, how feasible is replicating the benefits of the Alaskan community-led project in other coastal communities in the US?
Yes. Okay. So I will caveat my answer with the fact that I do not manage that portfolio. I'm happy to put you in touch with the person that does. However, it's something that I'm excited about and thought about. And so the kind of big answer is that no two communities are the same. So I think there are some lessons that are applicable across. Like we know that community input is going to be hugely important. We know that community buy-in is really important. We also know that you can't build something and then leave and not like nobody knows how to fix it, because that doesn't benefit the community either if you have to constantly rely on kind of outside sources of help. So there are lessons that can be applied, I think, across community. And I'm using community pretty broadly because all three of those lessons apply to Los Angeles, California and Igiugig, Alaska. So we definitely learn from each of these projects. In terms of will that exact river turbine work like it did for Igiugig? Can you just pick it up and drop it in another community? That's a little bit fuzzier of a question. I think the key to kind of working with communities and understanding if that answer is yes or no is going to them and understanding asking them, what are your needs? Does this help meet them? Is the river that we have in mind, maybe that is like the only salmon run in the community. So no matter how great that resource is, it's just not feasible to put anything in because there's just no community buy-in for that. And that's just an example. I went to school in Washington, so salmon is always kind of on my mind. But so I think in terms of the way it's worded, replicating the benefits, I think replicating the benefits certainly can be done. I just don't think that it can be done in the exact same way for every community. So that's sort of the short answer.
Great. And I know you said you're not on that project, but do you have any idea how or why that community or region was chosen for that project?
So I don't know the exact story of what happened, but if I had to guess, I would say one of the factors that at least was successful is that I think I mentioned the PI on that project actually he grew up in Alaska. And so I think that connection with the community was probably really beneficial. The other thing is, and so taking some lessons learned from ETIP, which is the Energy Transitions Partnership Project, is really letting the community kind of be the ones to put their hand up and say, yes, we want this. And I think that has been a very clear lesson learned. And that's really kind of the premise that ETIP is built on, is that some communities will be really interested in that and be willing to take the risk on a new technology, and some won't. And we shouldn't be the ones to tell them which kind of community they are. They really should self-identify. So how was that community chosen? That's a great question, and I don't have a perfect answer. But in general, we want the community to raise their hand and say that they're interested.
Awesome. And that sort of leads into a question that I had. I know you've talked about getting the community and stakeholders involved in this, and especially in that project, but what does that actually look like with the DOE? How do you engage with stakeholders or local communities and coastal communities to sort of get their perspectives and thoughts and make sure everything's sort of above board and actually benefiting these communities?
Yeah, so a lot of how we do that, there's kind of two ways. The first is that we have a pretty robust outreach and engagement. We have a whole team dedicated to that. And so we try to ask a lot of questions of our stakeholders, including communities in general. The way we do that is often, well, there's a couple different ways. One of the more formal ways is called an RFI, which is a request for information, which, like, what a bureaucraty kind of answer to have. But just so you know, if you do ever see an RFI, no, and you submit something, know that on the other end, somebody reads every single response, and we categorize, like, is this something we can do something about? Is this just something we are going to note? Sometimes the responses aren't totally relevant to the question we're asking, but somebody does read every single one of those and really take it into account. So please respond to RFIs if you see people do actually read the responses. So that's kind of a more formal way. A less formal way is that we do try to attend industry conferences, as well as conferences around different areas that we're starting to have work in. So I mentioned before, marine carbon dioxide removal is something that sort of an emerging interest for us. We are attending the AGU Ocean Sciences meeting, which is in February this year. And there's going to be a town hall on marine carbon dioxide removal. And so, and actually I'll be moderating it. So if you're there, come say hi. And so the point of kind of events like that is to go to a place where our stakeholders are going to be gathered, like a conference, and present some information for them, but then also really allow time for dialogue, and for them to ask questions and for us to kind of learn from each other. So those are kind of the ways, just in general, how do we talk to the stakeholders? I think those are two really big ways. In terms of how do we work directly with communities, of course, communities are involved in both RFIs and events where we talk to people, but a lot of that comes down to, in our solicitations, putting in kind of our funding opportunities, that we're really looking for a group to apply in that has strong ties with the community. So, and again, this isn't my portfolio, so I only know enough to be dangerous, but in similarly focused kind of community-oriented solicitations, we might have organizations like the local Chamber of Commerce apply in. And another group that we work really closely with and we think does really great work is Sea Grant, because they have a network of extension agents, people that actually work in the community and really know, who are those community members and who are those stakeholders. And so we always do our best, rather than, it would be impossible for the Department of Energy to get to know every single community out there. We really want to make sure that we're funding and supporting organizations that already have those ties. And we ask questions to make sure and validate that that organization does have the kind of connections in the community that we think they need to really be successful in a community-oriented project.
Great, thank you. Can you give just there's a lot of talk about the blue economy and powering the blue economy. So would you mind giving like a brief overview of what that is and what that means in the short and long term?
Yeah, so the blue economy is a term that I think was first coined by the World Bank, and then there's now NOAA has started talking about the new blue economy. So I can kind of talk about what both of those things are. The blue economy writ large is things that happen in the ocean. But the key piece and the reason why we really like the World Bank definition is because it's the sustainable use. And so it's not just complete exploitation. How can we get as much revenue out of the ocean as possible? It's how do we kind of understand what's going on in the ocean, leverage the food, energy, materials that the ocean has while still protecting it. And so it really has that kind of triple bottom line approach. And I think that's hugely important because like any resources that we need to manage, you have to manage it sustainably so it's still there. And whether that's because you still want to get resources out of it in the future or because you just want to make sure that the environment sustains, whatever your reasoning is, it's really ensuring that it's not kind of this exploitative approach. And so that's what the World Bank definition kind of gets to. We coined the term powering the blue economy to get to that, is that marine energy can power a lot of those offshore industries or uses or applications, but it's renewable energy, so it's sustainable. So now we're not relying on diesel, for example, to generate power for an aquaculture farm. If we can use marine renewable energy to do that, now we are generating, protein with a lower carbon footprint using marine energy. And so that's sort of the genesis of the blue economy and how we got to powering the blue economy. NOAA, which of course I don't work for NOAA, but being partners with them, they've coined this term, the new blue economy. And it's similar to kind of the definition of the World Bank or the one that we've adopted. But the new part is that it's really based on data. So it's all data driven. So understanding, especially NOAA has such an ocean observing focus, like what kind of data needs to be collected, how do you collect it, how can you synthesize it in a way that makes sense, and then how do you take all those things and use it to make good decisions. And so that's kind of the new blue economy, making data-driven decisions. There's a tongue twister for you, that still at the end of the day hits that triple bottom line. Sustainability is always a core piece of that.
Awesome, thank you. Do you have any tips that you might recommend for someone looking to enter your field or similar field of work?
Yeah, well, it will be a little bit biased but because I was one, but the Knauss Fellow Program really is a fantastic program. And it's a really good way to sort of explore a new part of the federal government and the Knauss Fellows case without kind of making a long commitment. And so me, and maybe I shouldn't be so open about this, but I always tell, especially incoming Knauss Fellows, the first time I knew what marine energy was the night before my interview when I Googled it, because I was trying to prepare for the interview. And so what's great about working in the ocean or marine energy is that lots of different disciplines and skill sets are applicable. And so, yeah, I started my first day barely understanding what wave energy is. That's something that you can learn. But I came out of my graduate program with an understanding of consensus building. How do you read a scientific document and kind of get what you need out of it? Scientific communication was another thing I focused on during my master's. Research skills, collaboration skills, like all those kind of things that you learn in school can be applicable a lot of different places. And so I guess that's my first tip, like don't write yourself off, even if you're not totally sure. In mine's kind of an extreme case, but know that the skills that you're generating through school can be applicable a lot of different places. I also think there's a kind of growing appreciation for an interdisciplinary approach. And so I think that's really true in the ocean. Like I work in our office, we have biologists, which is what I am, but we have engineers, we have communication professionals. There's an astrophysicist I work with who is lovely and knows so much, but came from a completely different discipline. And so I think valuing that interdisciplinarity and recognizing that these different perspectives really help us grow stronger and can be a better program is something that I'm seeing more and more. So I think that's really exciting. But to go back to kind of the original question, I think my concrete advice is if you're interested in the federal government, I mean, there is USA Jobs, you can just kind of apply, but I would encourage people to take advantage of some of the sort of student-oriented or previous student-oriented opportunities. So fellowships are huge. I've mentioned the Knauss Fellowship, but there's also the AAAS Fellowship. If you have a PhD, there's also the Presidential Management Fellowship. ORISE fellowships are also, at least in the Department of Energy and EPA, perhaps other agencies as well. So those are great ways to kind of dip your toe in and see if the government is something that you're interested in. The other program, just to highlight really quick, is called Pathways or Recent Graduates. And this, you can just filter it on USA Jobs. These are positions that are specifically looking for students that have just graduated and want to get into the federal government. And I think that's another great way to get in as well. In terms of, so that was like my government answer. In terms of the marine energy industry answer, there is also, not to keep talking about fellowships, but there is a marine energy fellowship that our office runs that would be a great way to align some of your research with the work that we're doing. It also comes with a tuition stipend, which as a grad student, I always love to see. And so that's a good way to get involved in the WPTO water power office. Otherwise, there are companies out there, they're hiring. I can't give specific company names because I don't want to imply that I'm endorsing any of those companies because I can't do that. But one place to look is we do have, and I can drop another chat for you to share with folks, Alyssa. If you look at the WPTO project map, this is a list of everybody that we've ever funded. And so if you're really excited about marine energy specifically, looking at the companies that we've funded would be a great place to start because it's a list of companies. You could go on their website and see if they're hiring. I will also mention for folks interested in academia, there is a network of National Marine Energy Centers or NMECs at different universities. Let me find a link for that as well. So there's a ton of work happening out of the universities. So you can see kind of what's going on at the NMECs. And then the last place, I'm just going to send you a bunch of links. I love this question, if you can't tell, are the national labs. And national labs have really great programs. They do internships. They also do postdocs for folks. And that is another really exciting and interesting way to get involved in some of this work. So those are kind of the main places I would start. But if you have more specific questions, again, you have my email. And as you can probably tell from how excited I got about answering this question, I'm always happy to talk to folks that are kind of thinking through next steps for their career.
Yeah, thank you. That was great. Most of us are graduate students here, so it's always really nice to talk about or ask questions or hear from someone that you're sort of, that's already gone down a path that you're trying to go down. So
Yeah.
I mean, and you're talking about being in such an interdisciplinary environment I'm in a geography department, so that's just very inherently all over the place in the best way.
Yeah.
Like, my roommate's a political ecologist and I'm a paleoceanographer.
Cool. That's awesome.
So I really appreciate that answer a lot. And I will definitely send over all of these links and slides and anything else you want to provide, as well as your email so that anyone can contact you. But we have another question. So how can innovative technologies and sustainable practices such as renewable energy be leveraged to promote both economic growth and environmental conservation in the new blue economy framework that was described?
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. That is kind of the question we ask ourselves, I would say, as every time we write a solicitation or get ready to fund a project. I think the answer is you have to be interdisciplinary, understand the question from a variety of different perspectives, and kind of take a holistic look at what the project can or can't do. The new blue economy framework, again, is really sort of the base of that is data. So collecting data and synthesizing it in a relevant way is really important, and having good metrics that can help you understand what you know, what's your project doing and how could you improve it? And so I think that's kind of the balance, right? Like we want to, our job at WPTO is to fund projects that eventually will allow the marine energy industry to kind of go off and be its own self-sustaining industry, much like the wind industry has a ton of economic growth yet to be realized, but always taking that approach of sustainability and conservation because, and that's kind of a, at least with the people I work with, just sort of a baseline, like obvious. We never want to put anything in the ocean that is going to harm the ocean because our goal is to help it by mitigating climate change. And so those are really kind of the trade-offs. Like I would say they're both important, but you have to kind of assess the economics and the sustainability at the same time and make sure that they're both carefully thought of in an interdisciplinary way before you can move forward. So I hope that got to that question a little bit.
Yes, data.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, we have just a few minutes left. If anyone has any last minute questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A. I do want to thank you again for being here and talking with us, and thanking all of our viewers that took an hour out of their time or a day or however much time out of your day to be here today. I really appreciate you being here. And I do want to note that our next webinar is next Tuesday, December 5th. We will have Dr. Sarah Cooley from the Ocean Conservancy talking about navigating the science policy interface and her journey from researcher to policy expert. So be sure to tune in for that. She's fantastic. But yeah, if there are no other questions, we can go ahead and wrap it up now. So thank you all. Thank you, Carrie.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks all.